Here's some video on social media that shows the port of Seattle, which is much quieter, at least reported to be, than usual.
Ship sailings, 17 of them, have been canceled out of a scheduled 80 or so. That shows that the drop will be precipitous and fast.
7 major ports just turned into choke points for U.S. trade, not with chains on the gates, but with blank sailings, suspended services, and booking freezes that blocked thousands of U.S.-bound containers in a matter of days. In Los Angeles, Port Chief Gene Soroka warned of a 35% plunge in Asia cargo starting next week as retailers paused China orders, a single number that rippled from factory floors to checkout lines. But what followed stunned both Washington and Ottawa. It began as the White House moved to impose a 25% tariff on imported cars, widening a web that already covered metals, machinery, and port fees. The announcement between March 26 and April 3, 2025, sent markets reeling, and ports felt it within days. From Yantian in Shenzhen to Los Angeles, Long Beach, Oakland, Seattle, Tacoma, Savannah, and New York, New Jersey, shipping giants suspended at least 6 weekly routes, a move that mimicked a blockade without ever closing the gates. Canada, whose economy sends nearly 75% of its exports to the US, felt the shock instantly. Auto parts and vehicles moved back and forth across the border daily. When routes vanished, production lines stalled. Ottawa called the US decision a direct attack and announced a $2 billion Canadian worker relief fund. For Canada, it was a strategy. For the US, betrayal. Before we unpack the shockwave, hit subscribe. Best comment gets pinned. The dockside collapse. On the docks of Los Angeles, the warning was blunt. Minus 35% from Asia next week, Soroka said, confirming retailers had halted Chinese shipments pending clarity from Washington. By May, dock workers saw hours cut and truck queues thinned. Imports fell at double-digit rates, forcing some firms to shift to air freight, 5 times costlier, to keep production running. The truth, however, was far more complicated. Offshore, global consultancies tracked at least 6 suspended Asia-US services. Each cancelled route removes 5,000 to 15,000 containers per week, effectively deleting a port's monthly throughput. For shippers in the Pacific Northwest, capacity vanished overnight. And yet, one decision would change everything: the policy shock. When the US announced the 25% auto tariff, automakers from Ontario to Stuttgart rewrote cost tables. Within hours, Canada's Prime Minister condemned the move, linked it to the $2 billion Canadian support fund, and signaled counter-tariffs on finished vehicles, a calibrated retaliation designed not to disrupt joint production lines. Factories reacted first. Stellantis idled its Windsor, Ontario plant for 2 weeks, paused its Toluca, Mexico facility, and triggered 900 temporary layoffs in connected US sites. Ottawa's pivot. By late August, Ottawa quietly shifted strategy. To tame inflation, it lifted many retaliatory tariffs while keeping targeted duties on US autos, steel, and aluminum, a move meant to restore supply flows without surrendering leverage. Canada's April trade deficit ballooned to a record $7.1 billion Canadian as exports to the US fell 15.7% in 1 month. By quarter 2, GDP contracted 1.6% annualized, with export-heavy provinces leading the slump. The freight freefall. After a 90-day truce, Chinese ports flooded with backlogged orders, but by June 1st, rates collapsed, down 58% to the West Coast and 46% to the East. Cheaper freight? Yes. Predictable freight. Number. In Ottawa, focus shifted from retaliation to resilience. Ministers pushed for a new trade and security pact with Washington to safeguard integrated industries. Still, economic gauges kept flashing red. Exports minus 7.5%, GDP minus 1.6%, first contraction in 2 years. The port chain reaction. Los Angeles/Long Beach. Import volumes kept sliding despite the truce. Seattle, Tacoma, and Oakland. Suspended strings starved terminals, forcing trucking slowdowns and rail cutbacks. An empty chassis, full yards paradox. Savannah and New York, New Jersey. Spring's surge reversed. Warehousing swung between overload and emptiness. Yantian, Shenzhen. A booking rush jammed berths, then reversed into chaos as rates whipsawed. The human ledger. Stellantis's shutdown signaled a regional chain reaction. Pauses in Canada and Mexico rippled into 900 US layoffs across suppliers and logistics firms. For families living paycheck to paycheck, this wasn't trade policy, it was survival. The port fee war. In mid-October, Washington and Beijing opened a new front. Port fees. Both sides slapped charges on each other's ships. Operators pulled China and US-linked vessels off those lanes, shrinking available tonnage. China introduced fees of 400 yuan per net ton, which rise annually, becoming a permanent cost baked into freight budgets. Analysts warned these fees would raise consumer prices worldwide. The global baseline. By autumn, analysts agreed. Tariffs aren't temporary storms, they're the climate. Businesses now model around permanent costs of 25 to 35% on key goods. Experts call this the highest US tariff environment since the 1930s, redrawing global supply lines and driving production clusters back to continental blocks. For Canada, the cost was already clear, a record 7.1 billion Canadian dollars deficit and recession-level contraction. But that was only the beginning. The political balancing act. Ottawa's new stance. Ease what you can, fight where you must. Remove non-strategic tariffs, protect autos and steel, and court Washington for stability. Economists now sketch a sober outlook. Thin schedules, rotating blank sailings, and intermittent port fees will keep supply chains unstable through 2026. You're watching Maple States, where verified facts meet sharp analysis. Subscribe and share your thoughts. The best comment gets pinned.